gets into like the petty things that they did to terrorize these people. I'm talking like having people sit on a pole.
Yep.
That is the width of a person's arm, 6 feet above the ground. Like, even stuff like that, like petty things.
Yep. For seemingly no reason.
Yeah. Not even to push an ideology, or literally just for the act of to make someone suffer.
I don't think they viewed it as a someone. I think it's the thing. I don't think they viewed them as people. I think it took the to devalue human life, and to do that to another human, you can't view it as human. And so I think that's kind of what he was getting at, was that they didn't see the prisoners as humans. They saw them as scum, less than life. I don't know, because yeah, they do talk about that. They would keep them up for days, for no reason. They would, dude, the bed bug box. You remember that part?
Could I read this one thing that might summarize all of this? This is, and this is on page 39, mind you. I have the rest. I have the rest of the book to read.
So this is day 2 for you.
He says this. Prisoners would have their skulls squeezed with an iron ring, that a human being would be lowered into an acid bath. They would be trussed up naked to be bitten by ants and bedbugs, that a ramrod heated over a primus stove would be thrust up their anal canal, that a man's genitals would be slowly crushed beneath the toe of a jackboot, and that, in the luckiest possible circumstances, prisoners would be tortured by being kept from sleeping for a week, by thirst, and being beaten to a bloody pulp. Not of Chekhov's plays would have gotten to its end, because all the heroes would have gone off in insane asylums. And that's not even like the darkest part of the book.
That's not
unfortunately.
He goes into the different.
Yeah, he goes into each one of those scenarios in depth.
Yep.
It's
the bedbug
tragedy.
one in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
They talk about petty crimes as petty crimes. That's not a good way to describe that. Even what they would describe as, they would put a salt water pack in someone's mouth just so they would thirst. They would break someone's spine, so they would take their tear ducts. I couldn't describe this in a specific way, but they wouldn't be able to stop crying just because they would break their spine in a way where they couldn't control how their tears would flow.
Duct.
Yeah.
They would tie. Oh God, I forgot about that part. Yeah. They would tie essentially where their head would touch their feet, but this way. So they would tie around their mouth. They would have like a leather thing in their mouth, and they would yank it all the way back and tie it around their feet. So you literally got a circle where here's the head, it's around your mouth, and you're reaching back, and it would break your spine. And another thing was, I really did forget about that one.
I have like all of them written down. I wrote down every single one. Like, it's unbelievable.
They would
have temporary horse replacements, where they would take them through the forest.
Yep.
Tie them to a horse, take them through the forest. They would push them down a flight of stairs, as we talked about in the beginning, because this specific archipelago was in a monastery.
Yep. A monk monastery transformed into.
Yeah, it was 365 flights of stairs.
Yep.
Tied
longwise to it, like.
Yeah.
Where you're like essentially hugging a wooden telephone pole and just barrel roll it down.
Just down the stairs.
Yeah, man, it was dark. It was I mean, there were a couple of chapters in there in particular that really went into depth. And they would do, like, the salt thing, they would do that. The torture was for you to give up names. And the thing was, you had no names to give. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like, he's talking about from a first person perspective. He's saying, I don't know anybody that's an enemy of the state. All I know are my friends and my family, and they're not enemies of the state. They're just as fanatic as I was. But they're torturing you, saying, give us names, give us names. Tell us who's in your society, your enemy society. And eventually people just give them names because it's like, stop torturing me.
And the thing was, because they had quotas, so they would exploit the people who would give names. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they got to make notes. They got to check boxes. All right. Oh, I got this person to admit to this, and now this person's arrested. All right, here we go. Even though they're just innocent people.
And if you admitted to it, if you said names, and you were implicating that you were an enemy of the state, and most of the time you were killed on the spot. They talked about that one Asian guy. Do you remember? That after days of being kept up and tortured, he said a name eventually. Or they gave him, oh, that's right. They gave him a good meal. And they gave him a big old chalice of wine. And under the influence, he said a name. He just said a name for it to stop. Because he finally felt like some pleasure after multiple days of torture. And they killed him right then. They shot him in the back of the head. And so you're left with this terrible predicament of the only way of surviving is to go through more torture. And the salt one that you were talking about, they would have a bunch of people in the jail cells. They would feed them salt, force feed them salt, and then whoever would give up a name would get a glass of water. So it was, yeah.
I mean, even the conditions on the rail cars.
Right.
There were two different ones, right? You had ones to the special camps, and then ones that went to the rest of the gulags. And in those conditions, I mean, you heard some of the worst things you ever heard in your life. Talking about how they would hand out sardines that would make people more thirsty. And even when they would give them water, they wouldn't let them go to the restrooms. Obviously, everybody just had to sit in their own piss. And you're talking about days and days.
Weeks.
Yeah, weeks. It would turn into weeks.
It was almost as if they viewed it logistically versus humanely. They would see, and I think Solzhenitsyn talks about this, it wasn't because they wouldn't give them water, not because they didn't want them to pee, but because taking everybody under being guarded while they had to pee took way more time. So it was like, okay, we don't have to have all of them survive. We just have to have a certain number of them survive. So we'll give them the minimum amount of water to make the trip. So essentially you're testing the limits of the human body in both starvation,
day in, day out.
Yeah. And when you do get water and food, you're just peeing and pooping in your spot because you're packed like sardines into a boxcar, a reinforced boxcar.